Welcome to Ambition's Apex, your guide to mastering the art of physique transformation and achieving peak performance across all arenas of life. Our mission is not just to sculpt bodies, but to change lives, empowering you towards excellence. Dive in with us as we explore insights and strategies designed to elevate you towards your journey of self-improvement. Enjoy the ascent. Welcome back to another episode. Today is another episode of the kind of official, kind of unofficial Saga Talk series that we have going on here. Today, I am accompanied by Danielle, who is a coach on the Saga team. We are both bodybuilding and lifestyle coaches under the banner of Saga Coaching. So today, we're going to be talking about a couple different topics that are kind of cohesive in a way. And that is post-show phase after, in the context of bodybuilding specifically, and then finding your why and purpose. And they're cohesive in the fact that in terms of psychologically, the post-show phase is very dependent on your why, and how it goes is going to be very dependent on your why and your purpose and everything and your sense of purpose. And then we're going to talk about from the athlete's perspective, and Danielle's going to touch on that a lot too. I do want to preface this conversation by saying that these things can apply to a lot of different areas of life. Depending on the endeavor, it could be business, it could be sports, it could be any event or performance that you may have, and a lot of anything that is kind of worth doing or going after, any sort of ambition that you may have typically is going to contain something of the sort. So working up towards an event or some sort of performance, and then your sense of purpose leading up to that, and then afterwards. And I'll touch on that a little bit more and explain that a little bit more. But Danielle, any opening remarks or just saying hello to everybody today?
Yeah, I think this is a good time for us to talk about this too, just because shows are starting to rev up and not everyone always thinks about post show before they compete. So, yeah.
100%. And that's probably a good place to start, to be honest, because competition season's in full swing for bodybuilding right now. And, we're having pro shows like every weekend at this point. We're seeing a lot of shows across Texas, which is where we're located, a very competitive state when it comes to bodybuilding. And, people are very, very focused on the show and, being competitive at the show, which is obviously valid, right? Like we have to be focused on that. And that's the primary focus. We talk about blinders on, we talk about tunnel vision, we talk about, singularity of purpose within a contest prep and cutting out distractions, all that kind of stuff, right? But, leading up to a show when that's the only thing that we're focused on and all of our eggs are in one basket in terms of purpose, like everything that we do, every bite of food, every hour of sleep, all of it has a purpose towards that goal of just bringing your best to stage and being as competitive as possible on stage, having the greatest outcome in general, right? And then afterwards, once that is concluded, you're kind of dropped off of a cliff in terms of your sense of purpose. Like the things that you're doing may not seem as meaningful, right? And it's a really tough position to be in psychologically for anybody. I don't think I know any athletes that don't struggle at least a little bit after a show, right? And it's going to be very dependent on person, but it's something that a lot of people struggle with a lot, to be honest. And so that's kind of, where those issues can stem from. It's usually from a psychological position of having a lot of purpose and meaning behind everything you do leading up to a specific event or performance. And then afterwards, that kind of disappearing and you just not feeling as much meaning and purpose towards everything. So afterwards, once like everything's kind of said and done, like I said, you have to focus a lot on that one specific goal of yours, right? Like in order to do anything really significant, like any big performance, like let's just say let's put it in a different context too. Let's say you're an executive in a company and you have to give a big presentation or like there's a big like launch to a new feature of your product. That's a good example too, where it's like you're working up towards this thing and then you get that win. And then afterwards it's like, what do I do now? Right. So that's just like to kind of have some level of parallel here. But, when we're focused on that singular thing, afterwards, we kind of let that go. But Danielle, to kind of wrap back around essentially off of this rant, what Danielle's talking about is like having more focus on the post show as well, or at least keeping it more in mind, bringing it up in your priority list, thinking about it ahead of time, thinking about strategies ahead of time. So Danielle, when you talk about, keeping a little bit more focus on post show and like people not thinking about it at all, what are some things that we can start to do to start to take it into more consideration or bring it up on the ladder in terms of priority and like maybe some things to expect ahead of time as well.
Yeah, I think on our last talk we were talking about, in your peak week, you're not introducing anything like new. You should already be pretty much like autopilot of like, your plans are set, everything's ready to go. So that gives you the opportunity to start thinking about post show. You probably, you know, well, hopefully with the coach that you have, is already giving you kind of some guidance of what is going to need to happen post show with like nutrition and training. That's all on an individual basis. It's different. But as far as yourself as that coming from the athlete, knowing like, okay, if I need to give more, time and effort into like maybe your family or into your work, having that kind of on your mind as well, I think is important because you've probably been neglecting some of that through your prep. And that I think that also can help if you post show, or a lot of times we'll deal with like body dysmorphia or we'll deal with, our struggles with food and, wanting to go more off plan than we need to. And we'll deal with a lot of those struggles. So if you can kind of set that aside and put more focus on like being present with family, being present with work, focusing on like a new goal that's doesn't necessarily have to be bodybuilding wise, that can be helpful to have that in your back pocket too.
Yeah, 100%. And finding, new things to aim towards, because a lot of that's what it is just like having an aim and something to point towards and to aim towards is really important for us psychologically in terms of moving forward and just making progress in life in general, right? So when you have that big North Star throughout a contest prep, which is the show essentially, and then not having that afterwards, like resetting and finding a new kind of pinpoint to head towards is really important. So, but that can be difficult too, because that star can be a lot further away than what that North Star was looking like within a contest prep. So you kind of have to reset mentally and remind yourself, like, it took me a long time to get to that show initially. And at one point, I was just as far from that North Star as I am now. So, a reminder of that. And then a tactic I usually utilize with athletes from a coach's perspective is just mentioning it, like keeping it more in mind or reminding them throughout the contest prep, like, hey, like usually when I'm like phasing out, or mapping out what the phases are going to look like for an athlete, it never stops at the show, right? I'm going to phase everything out afterwards. You're going to see where the reverse diet phase is and everything. And then just mentioning that too, like, the importance, one thing I kind of say, and this can vary in terms of how I say it, but I'll say we don't want to think of the contest prep as just being 16 or 20 or whatever, however long the contest prep is. We don't want to think about it just like this block. We want to think about it stretching out past the show through the reverse phase, because the reverse phase can be just as challenging in terms of some of the hunger cues that you're experiencing, the food noise. If anything, it's worse, you're not able to block out the food noise as well. Your body's going to be recovering hormonally. A lot of different things are going to be repairing within the system. And your nervous system is going to be re-regulating after all the stress that your body went through within the contest prep. So there's a lot of regulation that's happening, like psychologically, physically, everything across the board kind of needs to recalibrate and find some level of closer to homeostasis essentially post show. So just having people more mentally prepared, like, hey, this is something that's coming. It's going to be challenging, because I think, a poor strategy with coaches is to like not mention that at all, or not keep it top of mind, or not set the expectation of it or the perspective of it being a challenge to begin with, right? Like, it's just not even mentioned like, hey, this is something that's difficult that's going to be ahead that we need to work towards, or work through. Something that we're going to have to navigate through in the future, at least just so right? Like setting some level of expectation. I think that that's where a lot of coaches miss is like they don't communicate that at all. And then they're just focused on the show, like, oh, you're going to kill it, you're going to win. And then, whatever the outcome is at the show, they could have taken the entire show. They could have maybe not done as well. That can spell for even more disaster, right? And then afterwards, they're just like, I didn't know I was going to have to do all like keep dieting, right? I thought I was just going to be able to slam like a large pizza every day for the next 3 weeks, like as a reward for all my efforts, right? And that's just not reality of things. So, what are some things that, because since I've coached you for so many years, what are some things that, and this isn't for me to like glaze myself or to toot my own horn or anything, but what are some things that I've done to help you through like a post show phase, just as like some examples, perhaps?
Yeah, and that's good to note because or to touch on, because I have had experiences in the past with past coaches that there was zero communication post show, and being a very new competitor, and unfortunately this just happens with a lot of athletes, is either the athlete decides they want to separate from the coach and they don't have the plan, or the coach may ghost the athlete, and unfortunately that still happens too, and then there's no plan. So I've been very grateful to you that we've always had a plan that was implemented, and there was like communication of, what we were supposed to be looking forward to in the upcoming weeks and what to expect. And if things, aren't 100% or perfect, every person's different, and this goes into the psychology of it too. But me into where like you'll give me grace, but also bring me back to like, you are an athlete, you're a pro athlete, we do have that standard. And that's like a perfect balance of like, if I mess up, it's not a bit in my head, it's a big mess up, but it's like, it's not really a big mess up. So that's been helpful, is some grace, but also some like tough love. So yeah, just having the plan in advance, just knowing what we're going to be looking forward to, but also having goals of like getting health back on track. Something that we don't always think about, like if you lost your cycle or if sleep is like down the drain, that we have goals of getting that back and restored and in a good spot. I think as an athlete, when you're in the trenches like that, you don't realize how bad it is or how bad it may be, or how you might think your sleep is fine, but it's really not. And you don't realize that till weeks down the road when it actually starts to improve.
There's 2 pieces of that that I wanna unpack a little bit more, and that's first and foremost, like, the tough love part of it and the grace, because I think that that's something that's really important within coaching, because post-show is a delicate time for an athlete psychologically, and one thing that a lot of coaches may not take into consideration is, like, any deviation from the plan or, like, fucking up, let's just say, like in terms of I binged, right? Like I binged one night, and an athlete's already going to have a lot of shame behind that. Like they're already going to be feeling a lot of shame. So what's delicate about that is that we need to like let it go, and that it's water under the bridge, and then move on, because we head into a loop of like this negative feedback of I've failed, I've lost confidence in myself, and now like I'm not going to have as much like strength mentally the next day. And that's a delicate period right there, like a delicate, tiny little frame that we land in right there. So, an athlete could end up doing it again and again, and it turns into this toxic cycle. That's where we end up seeing an athlete gaining like 40 pounds in a matter of like a few weeks, right? And that's not good. And that's what we want to prevent. So it's really important for the coach to have a level of like sternness to it. Like, hey, this is really important. Reminding the athlete too that this is about them and their goals. This isn't about like the coach, right? Like, if I go and just chastise my athletes for like messing up post show, it's just going to add to that shame and guilt that they're feeling. It's going to be me like expressing my frustrations and like venting my frustrations at them, rather than doing something productive for the athlete. At the end of the day, this is about their goals, right? They come to you with their goals and what they're trying to accomplish, and your job as a coach is to guide them in that direction, and to do the right things and to make the right calls, and to coach them mentally in the right ways too. So there's a balance of empathy as well as like being stern with an athlete, because that's what a lot of athletes need and are looking for, is somebody to be like, hey, let's get you back into the right direction, but also to remind them like, hey, what just happened is water under the bridge. It already happened. There's nothing we can do about it anymore. Right. The past doesn't exist anymore. The only thing that exists is the present moment. So we need to recalibrate within that present moment to get an athlete back into a good direction. And sometimes as with a post show, there's only so many things you can do. Like, as a coach, and if an athlete just keeps spiraling, there's, like I said, there's just only so much you can do. But reminding them that this is about them and not about you as a coach, like this is about them and their goals of what they're trying to accomplish long term. So, and every single time, like, you fly off the handles within a post show phase, like you are really setting yourself back in terms of like long term progress. Unfortunately, it's just the reality of things. So, like I said, making sure that athletes have those expectations ahead of time and understand that it's going to be a challenge, and then that balance of like empathy and stuff. And then there was a second part that you had touched on, and can you remind me what that was?
The like recovery aspect of it.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that was the other thing that I wanted to unpack a little bit, was that was really good that you mentioned that. A lot of the athletes, if they're looking for like a new sense of purpose, like you talked about new goals, right? And it may help you to like amenorrhea is something that happens a lot within female competitors. And it's not like, if you lose your cycle within a contest prep, like it's not going to be the coach's fault. I can guarantee that. Like it's almost inherently like 9 times out of 10, it's going to happen if you want to get actually stage lean. Like, let's be completely honest here. And if you're enhanced, that adds another variable within that framework as well. Are there female athletes that get really stage lean and maybe even do multiple shows and never lose their cycle? Sure. But they're going to be more of an outlier. Like, losing your cycle is a likelihood. Let's just put it that way. If you want to be an actual competitive bodybuilder, the importance is bringing that back and knowing what, like, having a coach that knows how to bring that back into place, right? Bodybuilding is a relatively extreme sport. It places a lot of stress on the system regardless of who you are and what your genetics are, whatever it may be. There, like I said, there may be some outliers that may not have to grind quite as hard or grind their system down quite as hard, but again, losing your cycle is a likelihood. So that can be a really good goal post show, is like bringing that back, right? But obviously, in order to do so, you probably need to be working with a coach that knows what they're doing. Additionally, like, a lot of it's just a matter of calming things down, like calming your system down, letting it get, like I said, recalibrate back into some semblance of homeostasis, like back into like letting hormones kind of regulate, letting your body know, like, hey, the stress and that fight or flight mode that you've been in for the past 16, 20, 25 weeks is now reduced a lot. Like, that sympathetic tone's reduced, that cortisol cranked up consistently is reduced, the stimulant intake is reduced. The body needs some time to understand, like, hey, like, I'm safe again, right? So, like, and I've talked about this before, and I'm glad that it wasn't as controversial as it was when I have said these things in the past. But with female athletes, for example, since we're on the topic of amenorrhea, like, going through a contest prep, like, like, a lot of resources are just very restricted from you, and essentially what your system's telling you is like, hey, we have a lack of resources. We're not able. We've been in a deficit for a very long time. So we don't have enough food to sustain our own body weight. How are we going to be able to sustain a child's body weight? Right. So in terms of reproduction, that's something that your body will start to down. Like, that's part of why we see all these down regulations in terms of like sex hormones, thyroid function, a lot of different stuff is a survival tactic, right? It's reducing your metabolic baseline. It's kind of shutting things down in terms of reproduction goes for at least the time being, to reallocate those raw materials towards survival for that moment, right? So once things are done and you can start to reintroduce food and start to bring things back up, calm the nervous system down, tell the nervous system and your endocrinology that it's like, okay, you're safe. We can start to move back into a position that allows us to, for example, reproduce. That's essentially what we're trying to gear that body, like, gear you towards, essentially, in terms of recovery. So it's a lot of important stuff, and we've already touched on so many different importances when it comes to post show phase. But setting those goals, like regaining new goals in terms of regaining your health, we're pulling labs, we're seeing where you're at. Post show is a good time to pull labs, because it's gonna, or like also close to a show can be a good time to pull labs too, not so that we can be like, shit, everything's a dumpster fire, we need to pull the plug on your prep. It's like, things are a dumpster fire. That's to be expected. Like, we see a lot of flags here. There's a lot of things that we're going to need to work on after the show. And that gears you up to know what we need to start implementing after the show too. So a lot of good, like, goal setting involved in that, where, like, these are new things, like, we can start shifting our mindset to a new win, right? Wins aren't always going to be a plastic trophy that you earn at an NPC show. Wins can be getting your cycle back. Wins can be getting your liver function back into a better spot. Wins can be all kinds of different stuff. Wins can just be finding psychological balance, right? So what are some of the primary things, like, wins that you really cherish post show, or things that you're like, wow, that, like, really helps me get back into a good spot mentally and physically after the show, in terms of like aims, like things to aim towards?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that we touched on this a little bit the last time too, that your whole prep can't be for that, like you said, like that plastic trophy, that you have to have a bigger why. And I know we're kind of touching on that too, but goals, like, looking forward to, for me, like within bodybuilding, because that is just a big part of my life, is like improving and training. And so I think post show, that has always given me like a good reset to not necessarily like, okay, now I'm going to go PR on everything, but like completely like reset like the logbook, reset like form has probably kind of suffered a little bit because you are just continuing trying to push the envelope, and maybe things have started to tweak and started to feel a little bit of like ailments here and there. And so that gives like I give myself kind of a reset to like, okay, we're gonna keep weight down on things and we're gonna reset form. Or, that's kind of like my fun time to go like try out a different machine that works a similar muscle group and improve on that. So like goals within the gym would be something like that. Like I mentioned earlier, goals outside of bodybuilding being like work related or family friend related, spending more time with them. And I think ultimately a big goal with for me is like with my post show phases has been like just having a more successful post show phase each time. So you do learn every time you go. My first one or two shows post show was completely terrible, off the walls, because I didn't know any better. And so I do think each show you learn and you progress how to do it better and how to improve, how to recover faster, how much your body needs to like pull back from certain things, how much food you really don't need to be like eating in excess. And so I think that's the big overarching thing, is just having a more successful post show phase, whether that's, within nutrition and training or within just like personal life, recovering like your relationships.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I like how you talked about almost seeing it as a bit of a clean slate too. Like that can be really beneficial for people, is to like think of it as a opportunity to kind of start fresh, if you will. Like kind of clearing out things like any clutter that's kind of accumulated throughout the contest prep, like you mentioned, maybe it's like your form or whatever it may be, just cleaning stuff up and having more energy to do so too, because calories are going to be a little bit higher. You're probably going to be possibly experiencing food noise even at a greater volume than you did within the contest prep. So, but regardless, like, setting those goals, personal, physical, like health wise, like all that kind of stuff can be really, really valuable. But again, as we mentioned, just having those expectations heading into it is really important. And it's less so for like more experienced athletes. Like, you mentioned that you've learned a lot along the way. Like every time you've gone through it, you've figured out new strategies. But obviously that's like a cohesive thing too, that like, each time a coach, like you work with every season you work with a coach through a season as well, they're going to be able to help you navigate it better, because they're going to know where your issues lie or tend to gravitate towards within like the post show phase. And we'll talk, and that essentially what these goals give us is, or aims, like any sort of goal or aim is going to give us like a sense of purpose, or like a sense of why, right? Like everything, what we're doing is because we're trying to get to this spot, right? And we'll talk on that a little bit more, but I want to continue on the post show topic a little bit more in terms of psychologically. So one term that is often used is like post show blues, right? And post show blues doesn't come from bodybuilding. Like post show blues is a term that has been used in many different endeavors and performances. I've heard it used within like orchestra type performers. I've heard it within athletes. I've heard it within all kinds of, it's like post performance blues. And again, like I already pretty much kind of thoroughly explained this, but I want to touch on it a little bit more, dig into it a little bit more, is like just having so much purpose behind every tiny little thing leading up to a performance or an execution of something, sporting event, perform like an orchestra, like a choir performance, it could literally be for so many different things. And then afterwards, just feeling depressed, right? And that can be difficult. It's like a drop off mentally. And that adds to like fuel to the fire in terms of what's going on. Now, essentially what you're experiencing, and this is like partially because I read a ton of philosophy, you're experiencing a bit of an existential crisis essentially. And it's when you lose meaning or purpose, like you are pretty much kind of lost for the most part. And it's really, really like it's a heavy weight to bear. And this happens to people, for example, when they maybe lose their faith, like with religion, for example. This is a very common issue that people experience. Or, maybe they're sick of their job and they want to quit, and then they're like trying to figure out what they're going to do. Or like somebody that goes through like a midlife crisis, right? They're just like, I need something new, like something fresh, right? Or I've just lost my sense of meaning or purpose behind what I am doing. That's usually where that stuff is stemming from. So essentially, you're going through a bit of an existential crisis. And what's important is being self aware and being able to like at least reflect on these things too. Because after a show, if you're at least like and somewhat introspective where you can be like, I'm going through an existential crisis right now. I've lost my sense of purpose and meaning. I need to kind of reset and analyze that and look in, depending on whose life it is, right? Like everybody's different and has a different set of, things that they want to accomplish in life, different set of values, different set of principles that they live by, etc. So, being able to analyze yourself and like introspect a little bit and sit down with it. Like I always say, like, there's so much value in just like sometimes sitting alone in a dark room by yourself, just quiet, no phone, and just being like, what's going on in my mind? Like check in with yourself, figure out what's going on and help yourself navigate forward. Because if you're not self aware enough to like dig into that, like you're just like, you're not going to be able to get control over it or figure out the path forward, And I think that that can be really beneficial for people if they feel really lost after a show. Have there been any moments for you where you're like somewhat like existential crisis mode? Like I'm like lost right now. I need to like sit down and like calm myself down and figure out what the next move is. Have you had those moments at all? Because that's something that like, not much of us talk about. I feel like it's kind of a vulnerable topic, but I think it's really valuable for people to know that we can relate.
Yeah, it definitely has. 'Cause I feel like during prep, you start to get the tunnel vision, like, everything starts to narrow, and it's almost like the day after you compete, everything widens back up, and it's like a shock of, like, my system is just like, "Oh, everything's, like, beautiful, I don't know, and, like, I can eat all these foods, and I can go do all these things," and then it's, like, almost, like, overstimulating and overwhelming, and then add in work and life on top of that, and then I start to feel, like, this anxiety and this, like, stress start to build up in a time that we need to, like, for hormones and for recovery, like, be lowering stress, and so it starts to get, like, very overwhelming, and definitely, like, if you are not prepared for that, it can be very, like, I don't detrimental to your health, and then if you like we've mentioned, if you've start to food noises coming in and you start binging, and then you start get it just starts this, like, vicious cycle of, like, "I'm not good enough, I'm not going to, like, improve, I'm not going to, I'm not gonna be able to get out of this." And yeah, it's definitely a vulnerable state too, where then you don't want to talk about it. You don't want to bring up that you keep messing up. You don't want to talk about, you being a failure. It's not a failure, but I think that's where it's good to know yourself, like, and if you can be introspective, but sometimes some people need to lean on others too. And if it's someone that's more of an extrovert, maybe, or if you have other people that are going along with a post-show phase two, leaning on those people of, if it's someone you trust or your coach, and being open about about those feelings, and knowing that, like, it is normal, like, we all go through it in that phase, and navigating it is going to look different for different people, but just knowing that it is normal, it's a normal experience, it's a normal feeling to go through. And I think some ways to, like, help combat that too is, sounds cheesy, but the appreciation for the journey and the gratitude for it, along with, like, documenting, whether it's photos, videos. I think my last prep, I did a lot more, like, trying to document. I'm not much of a journaler, but you could do journaling too, and being able to look back at the journey and of the prep versus just that one show day, I think is can be really helpful too.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned a lot of great tools in there as well. And one thing that I wanted to touch on a little bit more and kind of pivot into more post show strategy from like coaches side of things, like what we kind of implement to help athletes. And there's not really no right or wrong here. There's like a lot of different ways to do it, obviously. And it's going to be dependent on the individual too, in terms of, who they are as an athlete, what their struggles are and stuff. And as a coach, you should be kind of analyzing those things and trying to anticipate. Like I said before, there's only so much we can do. And sometimes we see even the best athletes like really just kind of fly off the handles after a show. But it can depend on a lot of things. But yeah, so, you mentioned a few different like really good tools and then like documenting that kind of stuff. But what you kind of started with was talking about, when you talked about like tunnel vision and then how things like open up a lot. And a lot of that is like it's a big pendulum swing because bodybuilding is such an extreme thing, right? We're in an extreme and the pendulum's stuck over there essentially throughout a contest prep. And then as soon as it's done, it's can swing back. And what our objective is to get it to like chill out in the middle, right? And every single time you binge, for example, a post show, that's a big swing and then it's going to swing back. And you're going to like, sorry, coach, like I know that I'm not supposed to do extra cardio whenever I binge, but I went and did like 2,000 calories worth of cardio. And then we got to swing back. And then it's like this never ending thing. Or it's like, it could lead to a lot of different things. And I didn't mean to like mock the like doing a bunch of cardio like after binging because that can be a really tough that's actually a form of purging when it comes to like eating disorder behavior. So we want to like kind of be sensitive around those areas because it's really difficult, man. Like people can really struggle mentally post show, and I'm empathetic because like it's um, you know, everybody's battle can have a different level of like perceived severity or severity like within an individual, right? Like suffering is kind of a subjective thing. Like one thing that doesn't really cause one person much suffering could cause another person like an immense amount of suffering, for example. And I think that that's important for people to recognize in general. But with all that being said, what are some things that we are trying to do post show as coaches to help balance out the pendulum swings and bring it into center as quickly as possible and kind of recalibrate. And I'll start, and then Danielle, you can tell me some of the things that have worked well for you, and then some of the things that you've seen that work well for athletes, or things that maybe you've implemented into your own practice as well. But some of the really really important things are to think about, at least, is to recalibrate in terms of stressors, right? So we have a lot of different stressors that are placed on the system throughout a contest prep. We're going to have things like stimulants. We're going to have the simple fact that you're in a deficit is already a stressor. A prolonged deficit is going to be a stressor to an extent. We have cardio, we have training, we have a lack of sleep, especially leading up to a show. We have PEDs potentially, depending on the athlete, or the lack of PEDs, depending on the athlete as well, can be a stressor on the system as well, or not allow your body to handle the stress as well. Let me put it that way. We have general anxiety and just like the mentality of like everything's intense and the walls are closing in and we have a show to like perform at, and like my weight came up like 0.3 pounds last night and now I'm stressing out about it. There's a lot of different things that come into this, right? You could be stressed out about the other athletes that you're going to have to be stepping on stage with. You could be having other external factors that have nothing to do with the contest prep. It could be work, relationships, everything, right? And you're probably going to have to navigate all of that throughout the contest prep. So those are all stressors and load on your system throughout the entire contest prep. And a lot of what we're going to have to do post show is recover from that. So as a coach, one thing I'm doing is like, where can we pull stressors off, right? We're probably like if you're on PEDs, for example, we're probably going to pull a ton of that load off already, right? Like that's going to be one of the primary levers we pull. Another one that I pull down pretty quickly is going to be cardio. Like if we've been doing a decent amount of cardio leading up to a show, like, the food, like 9 times out of 10, if you just really crank cardio down and even just bring food up a little bit, like their weight's going to hold pretty well. Like the pulling out the cardio is not going to that's not what's going to cause somebody's weight to climb up really quickly. What's going to cause somebody's weight to climb up really quickly is them eating a ton of shit off plan. Like that's what's going to cause weights to climb up. So pulling that cardio off, if anything, helps them like recalibrate really quickly and regain some metabolic control a little bit. And they're going to be responding to the food better. You may even see weight, like them start to lose weight because you're pulling stress off and now their body's cooperating. And maybe it's been fighting a little bit leading up to show, which, a lot of athletes will deal with, like even with extremely successful ones with a very well executed prep. So just pulling that stress load off a little bit, the body will maybe even start to cooperate. I've seen athletes get leaner post show. Some athletes say they looked even better like after the show or whatever it may be, right? Could just be fullness and sodium, etc. But anyway, pulling those stressors off where we can is going to be really important and help that pendulum kind of rebalance and recalibrate. If you continue the workload that you've already had somebody on, like that's just going to spell for disaster. They're going to be like, hey, I'm already burnt out. So just pulling load off of them. Food wise, there's a lot of things we want to take into consideration. This one's a tough one. I try to bring in free meals as quickly as possible. Because if you can at least give somebody like a weekly, like aim, like we talked about aims and like goals, right? So like a free meal can be a really good aim to implement immediately, but you have to put a lot of like still have restriction around it, like in terms of, you know, you need to do this within a 45-minute window, for example. It can't turn into like this grazing period. You don't just say have a free meal or a cheat meal, because to an athlete, they're like, finally, I get my cheeseburger and fries. They eat cheeseburger and fries. They go home. They're like, shit, I'm gonna eat some candy now. Like, I'm gonna have some cookies, and then I'm gonna have a tub of ice cream. Before you know it, it can spiral out of control pretty quickly. So at least putting some level of like a window around it, like in terms of time, maybe even give some level of structure to it. Like, hey, go get a cheeseburger and fries. Like, give them a specific food to get. There's a lot of different tools we can utilize. And again, it depends on the athlete because they can vary a lot. But free meals are a great thing to implement as quickly as possible, because it's better for somebody to have a cheeseburger and fries once a week than for them to have a cheeseburger and fries every other night because they can't get themselves under control and because they have no freedom inside. Right. So, like, at least giving them some sort of freedom to look at, like, hey, if I just execute through this week, I get my free meal on Saturday and I'm good. Like, I'll be fine. I can last a week, right? But when it's just not even visible to them, they're just like, when am I going to be able to eat anything other than chicken rice again, or whatever their meal plan entails? Hopefully, it's not just chicken and rice, but you know, when am I going to be able to eat anything that's just like gluttonous at any point? Because all of us want to do it at least like once a year, right? At the very least. So just giving somebody like something within that framework. But those are a couple of things that I focus on. You know, pulling stress load off, PD load off. A lot of the health markers are going to fall back in line just from doing those things, just from pulling the stress off of somebody's system, just from bringing food back up a little bit, just from like getting them recalibrated mentally. Like, a lot of the health is just going to fall back in line because of that. And then emphasizing things in terms of supplementation. You know, they're probably going to be sleeping a lot better afterwards too, because they're not going to have as much anxiety or as many tasks to accomplish every day, which could be helpful. So, Danielle, from your end, what are some things that we've implemented that have helped you, or some things that you've even implemented within yourself that I've given you freedom to implement, for example, within post show phases that have helped you? And then what are some things that you're emphasizing with your athletes now as well?
I think you hit on like the main ones. One thing I noticed that was really helpful for me, I think this past prep, was with looking at the phasing ahead. And I've implemented this with my athletes as well, is we saw the post show, or we saw the prep up until the show, and then post show and beyond, kind of that post show phase, like what the phasing was going to be, and that, implementing a new training split. So while it wasn't immediately post show, I was still doing the same training that I had been, but I knew it was coming up in X amount of weeks, and that was something to look forward to. I think that was really helpful for me because it was like I enjoyed my training, but it was like nice to, after having months and or years of that specific training, to switch it up. So that was really helpful for me. I think in this prep, and like I said, I've implemented it as well. And I think it's beneficial because it's kind of like looking forward to that goal or just that something new, and that can be implemented or that can be applied to different things too. Like for myself, something I hadn't done until this last prep was I booked like 2 photo shoots post show. So that was something to look forward to, and maybe even like keep you kind of like a accountability to stay even more on track, because you're going to be, in less clothes or something like that. So that was something I did. And if you have the schedule availability to like book other things, like other, events, or I wouldn't book trips necessarily, like right immediately post show, but maybe you book a trip for a couple months down the road. And that's something you look forward to, once recovery has gotten a little bit better. So just again, it's just like something to look forward to, something to like treat yourself once things have stabilized and kind of calmed down. So
Yeah.
not something immediate, but it's coming in the horizon.
Yeah, 100%. Like I said, having something to look forward to, right? And there was two things that I wanted to touch on with that, and training specifically. That was a good touch point as well. Is, you know, post show is a really bad time to start doing anything different training wise. And I want to explain why. And your system has been like, if you've been switching up programs within your contest prep like a lot, you know, there's your coach may not know what they're doing, because a lot of within a contest prep, essentially what we're trying to do is stick with what we're doing and ride it through the entire show, or ride it through the entire prep, because we're trying to we don't want to introduce like a ton of novel stimulus first and foremost in terms of movement patterns or just like changing up your entire training block or volume or anything like that. A lot of that can spell for disaster in terms of injury because your body's in a pretty deprived state in terms of food, all that kind of stuff. Nervous system's really cranked up. So a lot of what we're trying to, and we're not even trying to necessarily build new muscle tissue within a contest prep either. The primary objective is muscle retention. So in order to retain muscle tissue, typically we need to keep doing what we've been doing to gain it to begin with, right? We need to keep signaling the muscle like, hey, we need to keep you here because we're going to keep doing what we've been doing, right? That's a really like simple way to think about it. So keeping the muscle stimulated in a way that it's been stimulated over time to get to where it's at and maintaining that stimulus. So maintaining some level of, similar volume, similar loads, all that kind of stuff, keeping that pretty solid, rock solid throughout an entire contest prep. Post show is just as bad of a time to do that because your body's in recovery mode now. Your body's trying to recalibrate everything else. So when you toss in a whole new training block, like right after a show, and you start doing a bunch of different stuff training wise that your body's not used to, you are at a higher risk for injury. You're adding additional stress load to your system when it already doesn't know what the hell's going on, is trying to recalibrate. Again, it's like we're in a pendulum swing. We're trying to find homeostasis. So throwing in new novel stimulus and all kinds of random movement patterns and soreness and just all kinds of stimulation to your musculature essentially that it's not used to is a really poor strategy. It makes zero sense in my. So that's another thing to like set an expectation towards and to plan towards is like we're probably going to be easing back into training and we're going to be easing back into what you've been doing essentially training wise. That's why like oftentimes with bodybuilding athletes, new training blocks can be very valuable and implemented in a right spot and, reevaluating somebody's split, for example, or setting them up with a new split or some new movement patterns. But typically speaking, within bodybuilding, like a training program should not change dramatically a lot, like and by any stretch of the imagination. It's something that holds relatively static. And that's something that a lot of athletes may not even know or understand yet. So a valuable point there. But post shows, like we don't want to reinvent the wheel as far as training goes. But like Danielle mentioned, having something where it's like, hey, like at the end of your reverse phase, for example, we're going to revisit training and shift it around. Or once we finish your reverse phase and then we're heading into a growing phase or whatever, we're going to implement a new training block or a new split for you that can give somebody something to look forward to. And, changing up training can be good just in the fact that like an athlete needs to somewhat enjoy training, like to an extent, right? We don't want to be reliant on that like within bodybuilding, like we're not necessarily training for enjoyment. Hopefully you do enjoy your training. Like hopefully you love like doing that same set of hack squats every single week and adding 2.5 pounds to it. Hopefully like you enjoy that. I know when I was bodybuilding, I enjoyed that. So, but not everybody enjoys that. And but the fact of the matter is we're not necessarily like we don't program training to entertain athletes. Like I'm not trying to entertain you with your training. I'm trying to get you to where you need to be in terms of your physique. So that's something to take in consideration. But that was a really good point just with training. Like, don't expect training to shift. And if you are somebody that's like trying to find new purpose and all that kind of stuff, and you start trying all kinds of different types of training and stuff, it's probably a poor time to do that. Not a great strategy. You're just, like I said, a lot of novel stimulus to your system. It's a lot of shock to the system, to the shock that's already experiencing. Like you mentioned, you're like opening up the floodgates to shock essentially. So it's not a good time to try anything new or like decide to go run a marathon or to start doing high rocks or whatever it may be. Right. And that's not to knock on those endeavors, but there's a time and a place to shift gears in terms of what you're trying to do. So, but yeah, we talked about training, and then there was one other point that you had touched on within that as well. You may not be able to recollect, but one other thing I wanted to touch on. Do you recall?
Training, travel, or don't travel.
Oh, yeah, that was it. Yeah, that was it. So the traveling aspect of things, booking a trip post show is a really poor time to do that. So it's definitely like, especially if you're going to go to like something all inclusive or something, like you kind of cooked yourself because you're gonna eat everything inside. Like your body is wanting to put on as much weight as quickly as possible. Your body, like essentially what happens is like your body is in a position that is completely unsustainable. Like being show like stage lean is like a single day kind of thing that you're able to do. Like even post show, you're going to shift away from that in terms of body composition, even at least in terms of fluid and stuff, right? Like we're not going to be able to, like what you look like on stage. If you were to try to maintain that look for like any longer than like 2, 3 days, like you're going to feel like absolute dog shit and it's not going to be sustainable any longer than that. So with that being said, when you're stage lean, like your body's trying to move away from that as quickly as possible, and we don't want to listen to our mind when it comes to that. We want to maintain control and discipline. And going on a trip post show is a bad strategy, and that's usually something I tell athletes, and sometimes they still do it anyway, and it doesn't work out very well. Some athletes may be able to do it. I'm not gonna lie. Like some athletes may be able to like keep things under control, and I think it's also important to note too, like everybody's different. Like some people can afford a little bit more of like chaos post show. Like some people just straight up like you may be able to just do whatever the hell you want post show and like you may not suffer any level of consequence near what some others may. So that's the brutal reality of things too. And there's contributing factors to that, there's genetics, there's post show experience, like how many times have you competed before? Because your body may not want to be doing this anymore, especially in regards to females. With female athletes will see this a lot more, generally speaking. Like every single time they step on stage or go through a contest prep, their body's like, hey, we shouldn't do that again. Like we don't want to do that again. It's a protective, like survival kind of mechanism. And the severity of that can look different for everybody. Some female athletes may not experience that fight back at all. But a lot of the times we will see female athletes where every contest prep gets a little bit harder, like a little bit harder to get them in shape, no matter how identical, like let's say their blood work looks heading into another contest prep. Let's say their body composition's in a similar spot. Like everything's like comparable from that first prep. The second prep's still gonna be a little bit more difficult for some individuals and it can get harder and harder too. And then the post show phase can become harder and harder too. And their body wants to rebound a lot more quickly too. It's like we want to get back to where we were at. It's a survival mechanism. It's like we need to stop. Like the body just doesn't like to be there. It wants to stay in a healthier spot and it'll overcompensate and add a lot of body fat on really quickly because it's like, hey, we're going to make it harder for you to get that lean. We're just going to keep making it harder for you to get that lean because you keep doing it. And we need to be able to survive. We need enough body fat on us to be able to survive the starvation. Like we need to be able to go long durations without food because you have basically shown us that we're going to have to go through that in the future again because it's a pattern, right? So you'll just pack on body possibly more and more body fat and your body's going to protect itself from going into that position again over and over again, which is an interesting perspective. I don't really hear people talk on it that way, but because it's more of like it's less human physiology and like mechanisms and more like almost like a philosophical lens, which I think is really interesting, like how the body kind of adapts in those ways. We talk about adaptation, right? And that's one example, but it can happen to men too. Obviously, each time. Sometimes the contest prep may be more and more difficult, or it could be more and more difficult to add more muscle onto your frame, for example. Like you start getting really diminishing returns and chasing that novel stimulus becomes more and more difficult, and your body's just not wanting to add on any more muscle. So, but yeah, I want to kind of shift gears a little bit more into the why and the purpose stuff, because like I said, they're cohesive in a way, because we talked about how having a why and a purpose contributes to post show blues, for example, or your success post show too, like regaining a different purpose and why. But let's talk about it on a more broader spectrum in terms of like, why are we doing all of this to begin with? Why are we competing? Why are we doing bodybuilding? Why are we chasing any fitness goals whatsoever? Right. And there's a lot of different things in there and a lot to unpack. So I want to, and I'm going to have you help some individuals out there too, is find a better why for bodybuilding, because bodybuilding is a lot of sacrifice. It's very challenging. It's a lot to put in. It's a lot of time, effort, money, consistency, monotony, all of it. Like it requires a lot out of somebody. And in the grand scheme of things, like in terms of like athletic performance, it's really not that hard of like that difficult of a sport. I can name like 5 different sports that are far more physically demanding, like in the moment in terms of performance and sometimes even training year round. But that doesn't take away from the fact that bodybuilding requires a lot of things that other sports don't require, like in terms of like, especially like time, and especially when it comes to like nutrition, for example, especially when it comes to how much you invest financially and like the lack of return financially, there's a lot of uniqueness to bodybuilding that isn't in other sports as well. So I want to keep a balanced discussion here. But when it comes to finding your why and your purpose with bodybuilding, like you have to love this shit. Like you have to love the sport of bodybuilding. And if you don't, like you're going to struggle a bit mentally here. So, like, you have to love bodybuilding first and foremost. You have to enjoy the monotony. You have to enjoy the style of training, like, at least to some extent. Obviously, there's going to be times where you're like, I'm not enjoying this shit right now. And that's perfectly fine. But at the end of the day, like, generally speaking, like, enjoying the style, like, lifting heavy ass shit for like 8 to 12 reps or whatever your rep ranges are on your program, right? Like lifting like heavy, intense sets with great technique, like going into the gym multiple times per week and like just locking in and progressively overloading movements and probably doing the same movements repetitively for months on end, same movement patterns, eating the same food pretty much every single day. You can find ways to enjoy that food and stuff, but honestly, like if you're trying to sustain this and do the same thing week in, week out, a lot of the times, like it's easier to just like eat the same things every single day, right? You can get creative, but it takes another, that's additional effort you have to add in, right? You have to enjoy all of like the entire process. You have to have the patience and appreciate the patience and appreciate the delayed gratification that it involves. You have to enjoy these things. Now, if you do not, you're probably going to struggle more than other individuals. And would you agree, Daniel, on everything I've said so far? Okay, so that's something to like think about before you get into bodybuilding because if your why is I saw Laura Lee and I like how she looks and she looks like she's getting a lot of attention right now and she's pretty in my eyes and I want to be like her and I want the trophy and I want to win and I want to go to the Olympia and you see the glitz and the glam and you're like I want that. That's really bad why or purpose. So let's reframe the mindset immediately. If you're getting into bodybuilding and not fully anticipating the amount of effort and time and sacrifice and investment that it's going to take, you're never going to have a full scope of that or like understanding that until you've done it, right? So that's fair to an extent, but at least at least do some research in terms of what it's going to cost. Do some due diligence, talk to other athletes like what are some things that you've struggled with? What are some things that I should expect? Your coach should be laying out some of those expectations too, to some extent, so that you can like figure out why you're doing it to begin with. Now, another why that I often hear is like, I just want to try it out. I need a reason to get healthy. Bodybuilding is not a health sport. We're not doing this to be healthy. And it's like, you may think like, somebody like you may equate somebody being shredded to like being health, right? And that's just not how things work. Health is relative first and foremost. So obviously being like obesity is not healthy either, right? But bodybuilding is also not healthy. So we just need to come to terms with that. It's not a health sport. So if you're doing it in order to get in shape because you think it's going to lead you down a healthier path, you're incorrect. And there's probably better outlets for that to get in shape. What are some other whys that you hear from athletes that may not be great ones to have?
Yeah, I think a big rise in like social media has, and that's similar to like idolizing someone that's on the Olympia stage. But just it seems like with social media now, there's a lot of like influencers attempting to get into bodybuilding, but then this doesn't go for everyone, but you'll see that their like career in it is kind of short lived because it was something they got into for the views, but not necessarily for the love of the sport. And I'd say that's one that I see a lot of is more just trying to get eyes on them, and there's not like a deeper why underneath it. Yeah, and probably what I like to think of is like throughout your journey, there's good and bad, kind of like you said, there's not always going to be, it's not going to be amazing the whole time. You're going to have some bad parts, but the good has to outweigh the bad. You have to enjoy it more than you don't enjoy it. I like to like joke that I have a really bad memory sometimes, but I think it's genuinely because the good times that I have within bodybuilding, within like my journey has outweighed the bad. And that's why I enjoy it. Because if you're just like, if you don't look forward to prepping your meals, if you don't look forward to the training, if you don't look forward to like the day in and day out, and you're just looking forward to the show day, you're going to be let down regardless of if you get first or not, it again, and then it just pushes right into the post show blues.
Yeah, 100%. And that. getting into it for like the glitz and the glam or for the notoriety and stuff like that. I think that that's a pretty common drive for a lot of people. They may see like the success and they're like, that's what I want, right? But we also have to like, it's the conversation is really black and white around genetics. And, it's on a sliding scale and spectrum. But at the end of the day, like bodybuilding will expose the hell out of your genetics. And in order to be really good at bodybuilding, like you have to have decent genetics. It's just plain and simple. And that's any sport. And we need to give bodybuilding what it's due in regards to that, because if anything, it's like I would argue maybe even more of a thing within bodybuilding than any other sport, right? Other sports require talent and genetics too. Like basketball is a great example, right? Like if you're taller, you're probably gonna like most NBA players are gonna be pretty tall. I think that there's a couple in the NBA finals right now that are a little bit shorter guys, but and short as in like 6 foot tall, right? Like, but that's an example. And then there's just like talent, right? Like we all saw those kids like when we were growing up, whether it was elementary school or middle school. It was just like maybe we played a little bit of baseball with them, or we played a little bit of volleyball on like the whatever, or just general athletics. And there was always like that kid that was just really good at everything for some reason. Like, like that's an example of just like, sometimes like I hate to tell you, but you may just not have what it takes to be a pro. You may not have what it takes to ever get to the Olympia stage. It's actually possibly a high probability that you don't. That you like no matter you could do this for 20 years and you're not going to end up on the Olympia stage. It's just the brutal reality of the sport, right? So to be doing it because you want to get to the Olympia and that's your ultimate goal, that's all fine and dandy, but like if that's your primary why, you're gonna end up really disappointed and potentially having spent immense amounts of money and putting everything you had into it and cutting off all the people that were special to you and important to you, cutting off everything to try to get to that spot that was just never attainable, unfortunately. And that's not to say like I'm all for shooting for the moon and landing in the stars. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm all for like, hey, yeah, like let's try it out for like 5 years. Like, let's see how well we do. Like let's turn pro. Like, let's try to get to the Olympia stage. But at some point, it's just not for everybody, is what I'm trying to get at, right? And there's a level of genetics, talent, everything that's involved in being able to be extremely excellent at the sport. And you have to right a balance there because it's possible that you're wrong, like that you're wrong in terms of like not being able to get to the Olympia. Like you think you're not going to be able to get to the Olympia, right? And you could be wrong there too. So it's a balance, right? We don't want to be too delusional. You can be a little bit delusional. Like I said, shoot for the moon and land in the stars. Like that's fine, right? But what I'm trying to say is like that shouldn't be your primary purpose and your primary why behind what you're doing. And if you that is, then you need to reevaluate everything probably in some regard. And like I said, this can relate to a lot of different things. It could relate to business stuff. It can relate to other sports. A lot of the best coaches in the world in regards to like other sports were once athletes within that sport that just didn't quite have the talent or genetics to get to the highest level. That's very common, like very, very common. And I've seen it in tennis. I've seen it in basketball. Some of the best basketball coaches that have ever existed on the NBA level were once basketball athletes themselves and like just couldn't they were like they put everything they had into it and just weren't quite good enough to get to the NBA, right? Like they did everything. They trained harder than everybody, they worked harder than everybody. They made all the right moves, they sacrificed everything to try to get to the NBA and they just couldn't quite make it. And then they coach because they're still passionate about the sport, right? And that happens to a lot of bodybuilding coaches too. That's I'm not going to say I'm like an NBA level coach by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a similar like kind of journey that I had, like I put everything I had into bodybuilding. I could have kept going, like, who knows? Maybe if I would have kept going and kept pushing for another decade, maybe I would have ended up turning pro, who knows? But, I decided to shift gears, so but yeah, the reasoning and the why is really, really important because like you're setting yourself up for a lot of disappointment if you don't have that aligned with bodybuilding. I think some of the most common ones we've already touched on. Are there any that we're missing here in terms of like ones that you probably shouldn't have as a top priority in terms of why or reasoning behind bodybuilding?
Yeah, I think we touched on the main ones. I think also, I guess keeping in mind like your bodybuilding career can't go forever. Just like most athletes, like you can't be a NBA player forever. It is going to come to an end at some point. Now there are still some like competitors in the 60, 65 plus classes, yes, but for the majority, like, it's somewhat short-lived. And if again, if you're I think even when you do have a sincere why, and this is kind of going into a different topic, but when you step away from the stage, you hear a lot of people still go through kind of like a crisis of an identity crisis, even though they do have a genuine why for bodybuilding. But that when that bodybuilding's taken away, it can be hard. And so maybe that's a tougher time actually than the people that don't have a good why.
True.
But if you are to, to step away and you don't have a good why, I guess that that might be an easier transition actually now that I think about it. But maybe not, it's understanding that like if your why is for, for yourself, for your family, being something with, the strength within you and all of that, then you have to be able to step away from the stage and still have that like piece of you, and then just pour it into something else.
Yeah, 100%. And I love that you mentioned that because that's essentially what happened to me. Like after I stopped bodybuilding, I was kind of lost to be honest. It was a little, and it was like, because I went through pretty tough contest prep and then like kind of took an L because I really wanted to win. And that was like a time where maybe my why wasn't in the right position, right? I just like the only thing I wanted was to win. Like I wanted an overall. That was the only thing I could think about. I was willing to do whatever it took to get there. And then after the show, like I was really kind of disappointed in the outcome and a little bit lost. And that was like a time where I almost completely hung up bodybuilding. I didn't bodybuild again for like 3 years after that, I think. So that was my second show. But third show, I had already kind of decided that was going to be my last show, I think. I was going to like, I was already kind of like, this is just, I'm going to do this one more time. I'm going to prove to myself that I can move up to classic physique and put size on my legs and like, just wanted to just prove to myself that I could do it one last time. And then afterwards, I wanted to launch the coaching business. So I think after the second show, I'd already kind of decided that I was done with bodybuilding for the most part. And this, the last time I did it was just like kind of a last hurrah and to like prove to myself, I coached myself for that show too. So I wanted to prove to myself that I could coach myself. It was a lot of just like chip on my shoulder kind of thing. But yeah, the after that second show, like I was really, really lost and struggling mentally. So I think, the transition from like having the mindset of like life after bodybuilding because that's really really important. My circle that I had like when I got into bodybuilding like always said that was something that was always said like there's life after bodybuilding, there's life after bodybuilding, like always keep that in mind. So I'm really grateful to all the individuals that ever said that around me throughout, but keeping that in mind is really important. Recalibrating like after you decide to discontinue bodybuilding is really important. Again, you really have to love this sport to be doing it. And we can touch on maybe some other whys, but like that's where it becomes difficult too with bodybuilding. And I find with athletes is like part of the reason that they like come up with like whys that maybe aren't the best is because they have a hard time finding whys that are really valid for bodybuilding. Like, let's be honest, like, you know what I mean? And I'm not trying to steer anybody away from the sport or steer Danielle away from the sport either, but it's like, but it's difficult. I wish bodybuilding we could find ways to reward the athletes a little bit more. But I understand, like, it's partially because, it's not a big spectator sport. There isn't like millions of people watching it on ESPN. There's not like, there's a lot of aspects to it that are its own challenge in terms of like reward that you get from like all the sacrifice, right? So that's part of the problem is ROI to an extent, but that's why I think that it is most important to really enjoy the sport, really love the sport, really love the training, the food, the lifestyle. A lot of people that are, we've talked about this before, like a little bit more type A, maybe they're a little bit more introverted and kind of keep to themselves, live a little bit more of a monk kind of lifestyle, may gravitate towards the sport a little bit more because it's a lot more cohesive with what they already do, if that makes sense. Now, there's other whys too, like in terms of it's something that's really challenging and difficult. You could be leading by example in a lot of ways. If you're a coach, I see a lot of coaches that let me rephrase that. I need to backpedal a little bit, but some coaches that are active competitors too that do a great job of leading by example and like giving a high level of service to their athletes at the same time. And those athletes that still compete while coaching are leading by example and showing that they're walking the walk and leading and putting themselves through the difficulties so that they can relate to their athletes better. I think that can be really valuable, but I'll be honest, that's a little bit rare. I think a lot of athletes that actively compete and coach don't do a very great job of balancing the two. Danielle, you're somebody who balances this extremely well, so you're a great example of that. But yeah, just I don't know. You got to search. You got to dig a little bit deeper for bodybuilding in terms of your why. and then maybe other sports. So what are some whys for you outside of, loving just the general lifestyle of it and what you do? And obviously like like it helps you create an impact and stuff too. So maybe speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, when we touched on, like, bringing this up for, like, a talking point, I kinda was like, well, like, I don't know, what is my why?" Because it's not something that was this big, like, blatant, like, one thing I know a lot of bodybuilders have brought up is, like, sobriety, and that then they got into bodybuilding because of becoming sober, or if they have a lot of times you'll see, like, bodybuilders that do have, like, addictive personalities and stuff like that. And then I'm sitting here like, I don't know, what is my why? Because you kinda get into the hamster wheel of like, yeah, I just love it. So, like, what is it?
Though.
Do it.
That's good enough for me.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm sure I think it can be traced down to, like, a younger version of yourself and your upbringing and your personality. I think there's a mishmash of a lot of things. You brought up, like, the type A personality, and I think when you factor in that and then just, like, life experiences that, like, I've had, like, growing up, not feeling good enough to fit in with a lot of my, like, group, like, when I was in like a dancer growing up, not feeling like I was good enough and, but I still had a lot of discipline within dance. And so I think little factors come from different areas of your life. And then it brought me to this point where I found bodybuilding. I like dipped my toes in it and then I like dived into it. So that's kind of not really like the why, but there are parts of me that have added up to become this like why I bodybuild.
Yeah, 100%. And like I said, the fact that you just love it is like, it's good enough right there. I mean, I think that that's why anybody should do anything is because they love doing what they're doing, right? Life's too short not to be doing stuff that you love doing. But you did touch on a couple other points that are really valuable as well. And the sobriety one's really, really awesome. I've seen athletes where bodybuilding has been their outlet to find something that gives them a lot of sense of purpose and meaning. And finding their sobriety through that is pretty cool. And there's a lot of different things, a lot of different ways to find sobriety. I've had my own journeys with that as well. I've never had like an issue with any substances, like bad issues or anything, but going through periods of time where I'm just like completely like don't drink any alcohol whatsoever, that kind of stuff. I've definitely had those moments. I've definitely had moments where I drank a little bit more alcohol than I probably should have, but never really had an issue with that. But I think that any reasoning for somebody to have to improve on that is really, really valuable. And I I've also seen a lot of like addiction in my lifetime, and like I observe it now. Like in our country, it's definitely a really big modern problem that we have too. So like anything that can get people doing something productive for themselves or for others is a positive thing. And I think that we're too hard on each other for that kind of stuff too. Like, anything that somebody's doing that is relatively productive that they love doing, like I think that that should be celebrated, because it can keep them from doing something that's a lot worse. So, but yeah, that's a good one. And then I think that there was a couple other ones that we touched on as well when it comes to like just having a lot of reasoning behind bodybuilding in general. Community was one thing that I wanted to touch on. So community with bodybuilding is like it's kind of like a 50-50 sort of thing. Like I think 50% of it, like we can have a lot of value in terms of that being part of the why, at least within the ranking of like priority, because there is a great community within body, very supportive, very like everybody gives each other a lot of compliments and stuff. It's like, hey, you're looking awesome. Like, like when's your show? Like that's something that, for example, like my girlfriend, when I've brought her around like events and stuff, like bodybuilding events, whether it was like a meetup or whatever it was, it's like everybody's so positive. Like everybody's like giving me a bunch of compliments. It's like, yeah, it's like it's kind of how we operate, but it's kind of like there's a flip side to that too, where there's like a lot of gossip and like but that's, I talk with people behind the scenes about that a lot too. It's just like any industry has its toxicity, right? Any industry, any group, any community is going to have its gossiping and its nonsense and its drama. So that's an inherent part of any community. But a lot of people do find their community in bodybuilding. I think that that's valuable, but I'm not sure. That's why I say it's kind of a 50-50 because I wouldn't place it as at like the top of your priority list in terms of meaning and purpose, but it does have an added benefit if you're somebody that's, I think a lot of like people that, and even myself, I can speak to this maybe a little bit is just like, cause growing up, I was a little bit of an outcast, right? Like a little bit of a troublemaker, maybe didn't fit in with everybody quite as well. I do feel like when I started bodybuilding, I felt like I kind of like found my people almost, if that makes sense. So, that can be valuable, but, it has its dramas and stuff that come along with it as well, pretty much for anybody. So, but yeah, I think community is good. I think finding, it's one thing about the community piece that came to mind earlier, and I'm glad that I just remembered this. But, I think a lot of people are looking for a community within bodybuilding, and they may be left disappointed a little bit because we have to remind ourselves that it is an individual sport. This isn't a team sport. We call it team saga and like, all that kind of stuff sometimes. But and I'm like, hey team, like, but at the end of the day, it's not a team sport, it's an individual sport. And like the teams are more just like sub communities within the community of bodybuilding. It's like everybody works with a single coach. It's like you're kind of like on this team together, and it gives you an added like support system, and that's kind of what I try to build within the community of like Saga, for example. It's like everybody can kind of like talk amongst each other. It's like you're kind of on an inside group, and I try to facilitate where like they're talking amongst each other, like outside of that too. It's like, hey, like they're able to connect with each other, and just having that community is cool. But at the same time, we need to remind ourselves that it is an individual sport. So if you're looking for somebody to lean on all the time, or like you're looking for somebody to be able to pass the ball to, for example, like as a metaphor almost, you're not going to have that, because at the end of the day, it's all your responsibility to be the bodybuilder. It's your responsibility to connect with the community and to involve yourself in the community and to reach out to the other athletes and to put in the effort to build relationships with them. Like at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to do that, right? Like it's not the coach isn't orchestrating a team necessarily. Like I'm not trying to, as a coach, I'm not focused on like, okay, like how do I get this athlete to interact with this athlete better and like be able to pass the ball to them better? Or like, how do we map out like the game plan for this game so that all the athletes can move around cohesively for us to win the game together? Like that's just not what any coach is doing and shouldn't be doing or spending their time doing, right? So if you're looking for that, then I think that listening to what I just said may help you set better, more realistic expectations in regards to what the bodybuilding community does have to offer. But like I said, 50-50, I think that there's a lot of fantastic things about the bodybuilding community as well. Is there anything you want to touch on when it comes to that?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Because thinking about back to like my why, or just anyone, when you think about the amount of time, I mean, if you're in a partnership with someone, it might be a little bit different, but especially like if you're single, how much time you're spent working towards your goal in bodybuilding, how much time is spent alone in the kitchen, with your check-ins, with training. Even if you're training with someone else, there's still a lot of time that you're doing it alone. And you have to, back to what you said, you do have to love it, because you're doing all of that not for, your like training partner, not for your teammates. You're doing that for you to get your body to look, to X physique or X goal. But it is very much also like, it is good to have that community. They are like two separate things. That's how I see it, is like I have my bodybuilding journey and I have my goals, but I also have a team that I can go to and they can come to me for questions, and I can provide my knowledge to them and we can grow from there. So I do see them as like two separate things, but we're all under this big umbrella. Yeah. So I definitely agree with that. I had one other thing that came to mind when you said reasons to not to, get into this.
Mm,
And I think you had touched on it too when we were talking about like binge eating, but a lot of, unfortunately, people that coming from like eating disorder backgrounds,
mm,
I've seen that too, where, and me personally, I have had that experience, but I was much, much younger and far past recovered from it before
mm.
I got into bodybuilding. So that side of things doesn't affect me anymore. But I do see a lot of people that it is common for, if you have any kind of like eating disorder, an disordered past, to get
Mhm.
into bodybuilding, to probably reevaluate things, because you might not realize how quickly it could flare up. It can also be very helpful though too. So because you have such a structured plan and you are getting nutrients in, versus if someone's like anorexic and they're not eating at all, it could be a very helpful pathway too. So you just have to be very, analytical and cautious with that kind of athlete. And they need to, disclose that before working with a coach as well.
Yeah, 100%. That's a great point. It's a little bit off topic in terms of like in relation to like why and purpose, but I think that this is a great opportunity to talk on this since we have touched on that a bit, and in terms of like integration into and friction against like becoming a bodybuilder or getting into the space or even within the community. I think that it's similar in regards to like a relationship, for example, where if you're carrying like traumas, for example, or you're maybe not healed from past relationships, or you haven't done the like introspection in terms of like evaluating what your values are as a partner and like what you want to bring to the table and what you want somebody else to bring to the table, for example, and what your standards are, what you're willing to tolerate, not tolerate. I think that all those things are really important, like heading into a relationship with somebody, for example, like significant other, a relationship. I think that bodybuilding is similar, where like a lot of people get into bodybuilding without having done any of that work, like internally, like they're not necessarily healed from other things and like past situations and past things that they've been through or past athletic experiences that they have been through. They may be carrying like traumas and all kinds of stuff into bodybuilding that bodybuilding is going to expose. I say that relationships are kind of a mirror a little bit in that regard, not full like reflective mirror because sometimes it can be distorted, but like it's a reflective mirror in terms of like if you are carrying issues and like traumas or things that you need to work on, like a relationship's probably going to expose those at some point, right? Like somebody's going to either tell you or you're going to be like, damn, like I really spiraled here. I need to work on myself, right? Like it's going to expose a lot about yourself. And so I think bodybuilding is a similar thing, but it's important in both relationships and within something like bodybuilding because this can probably happen in a lot of different things or endeavors or just commitments that you make. Being able to be like hold yourself accountable, like, because I think that that's something that athletes lack a lot of sometimes. And generally speaking, I'm not saying everybody or even 50-50 or claiming any sort of percentage of this, but it's something we do see, obviously, right? It's like a lack of accountability, like being able to be like, yeah, that I like owning up to the mistake. And sometimes we'll see the extreme of that too, where people are too hard on themselves. But I think just having the level of accountability, like, okay, bodybuilding is exposing this part of me that maybe has been subconscious or like some sort of, or it's like, it's triggering a trauma that I have or whatever it is. It's triggering something within me. I need to look at that and understand what's going on and and work on it, right? Like, so I think that bodybuilding can be really valuable in that sense and give somebody a sense of purpose. Like, hey, I'm learning about myself here. But in order to do so, you have to be able to hold yourself accountable and have responsibility over like your actions and how they impact the outcome and how they impact other people within the space, et cetera. So, but eating disorders are a great example of that, right? Like if you're not healed, then and you head into bodybuilding, like that is a really, really bad combination, to be honest. So, and we're not psychologists here, so we don't want to like, we're not trying to diagnose anybody. That's up to you guys to figure out. But if you have been diagnosed, and bodybuilding may be something that you should steer away from a little bit. But if you are healed from it, then it's like like when in relationships people will be like, "Come healed or not at all," right? Like it's like that kind of thing. So work on yourself. Make sure like if you just went through something like pretty traumatic or like you're making a career change or like you just got out of a relationship, like bodybuilding may not be the thing to jump at. Like if you haven't done it before, for example, give yourself some time. It's just like relationships. You probably shouldn't jump right back into another relationship after one went really south. You know what I mean? It's similar kind of thing. Same thing with like shows too. Like if you went through a show and it was like it kind of went like the outcome went south, maybe you didn't get the outcome that you wanted, maybe things didn't go quite as planned or something, whatever. Jumping into another show is maybe not the best strategy. Maybe you need to take some time to yourself, heal a bit, like recalibrate, and then get into the next one, right? So, yeah, I think that that's a good kind of ending spot, to be honest. I think that, did you have anything to mention about those things that I just talked about?
No, yeah, that all makes sense. It's those little things, they can maybe like spark your flame a little bit, but the flame will die down real fast.
Yeah, for sure. So you got to be able to have the discipline to like after a relationship, you gotta sit down for a bit and like kind of focus on yourself, build yourself back up, and make sure that you're somebody that somebody wants to be with, right? And same thing with bodybuilding. Like if you're wanting to find, if you're looking for something to find purpose, sometimes you just need to like focus on yourself and just growing and analyzing yourself, things that you can improve on before jumping at the next thing. So, but anyways, this was a great chat. As always, you can find us at Saga Coaching on Instagram. I am at Sean Irwin, SeanIrwin_, and then Danielle, you are?
At Danielle_626.
Yes, and you can find us on Instagram. It's probably the easiest way to get in contact with us. And we'll keep releasing monthly episodes here on Ambitions Apex as well, usually in the context of bodybuilding, but we try to make it inclusive for any individual trying to accomplish anything significant in life. But we will see you guys next time. Thank you for joining us. Your journey towards excellence does not end here. We're here to help guide you every step of the way. For more insights and to become a part of our community, follow and subscribe. Your feedback illuminates our path. Be sure to share your thoughts and stay tuned for more episodes.